Rumpus Radio presents a play by John Goodrum, based on the original story by Edgar Allan Poe. The Pit and the Pendulum.
No! No! For God's sake! No! Hello, who's there?
The walls. They're back. They've gone back. Look at them. Look at the walls. They're back where they started.
Sir?
The walls have gone
Sir?
back. The walls.
Pay some heed to me, sir, please, I beg of you.
The walls. The walls. Look at the walls.
Sir!
The walls. They're back where they started. Do you see them?
I see the walls where they are, sir.
It's true. I'm saved. You saved me from the pit.
The pit, sir?
Don't go near it. Don't go near it.
Oh, sir, I won't go near it.
I must save her. Catherine, I must find her. I must rescue her.
Take care,
I
sir.
must rescue Catherine.
Yes, sir. Now come over here, please. Come over here and sit down.
Don't go near the pit.
We're all right, sir. Now come on. Sit down here and calm yourself.
I must find her.
Yes, sir.
I must find Catherine.
Who's Catherine, sir?
Catherine? Who's Catherine? My wife. Catherine's my wife. Who's Catherine? I must rescue her.
No, sir. You must rescue no one, not in your present state of health. You must steady yourself. You must collect your thoughts.
Catherine.
I'm the one who can rescue people, sir. You must take comfort in that and grow calm. Here, drink this. Huh? Here.
That door. I never knew. All this time, I never knew.
Sir?
Who are you? Who are you? Who comes to save me on the brink of death? On the brink of a death so horrible that my poor, inadequate imagination could scarcely dream of it.
My name's Josiah, sir. Josiah Bellamy. I'm a constable from a village. We've taken the house, sir. We're in complete control.
You've taken the house?
Oh, yes, sir. Myself and several of my colleagues from the county.
You've taken the house?
We've an armed division of Cornish yeomanry to back us up, sir. The blades of their swords are sharp. Any attempt at insurrection will be met with the severest penalty. I believe these troops are more used to dealing with riots among discontented workers. Today, they must deal with a riot of a very different kind.
Oh, my God, yes. Yes, they must. I'm still in the house, then.
Oh, yes, sir.
I've tried to believe all along that I was still in the house.
Well, you're in the house, if a chamber hacked out of the rock some 30 feet or so beneath it, and reached only by a maze of staircase passages from its cellars, can be said to be part of that same house.
Catherine.
No, sir. No, you're too weak to move. Please, rest here until you're stronger.
But
I'll wait with you if you like, and then we can both leave together.
Catherine.
Everyone in the house is in our charge, sir. No further harm shall come to anyone here, I promise you. Or we shall know of it. May I ask, what your name is, sir?
William Trevelyan.
Tell me, how you come to be here?
It's hard to be clear. I fainted, I think. Yes, I'd fainted. Yet I didn't lose all consciousness. What of it there remained left me numb, dull, without any of my usual senses, as if my mind was soaked in drink. It was like that time in the dark of the morning when our nightmares reach out from sleep, hoping to grasp at something tangible, that they might escape into the real world, only to be beaten back when awake. I knew I was being lifted up. I knew I was being carried. But no sight or sound or touch or smell could tell me in which direction I was being taken, until, with a violent jolt, I knew we were going down and down and down and down, until a hideous dizziness overcame me at the seeming interminableness of the descent. And then suddenly stillness. An empty, inexplicable stillness that echoed the unnatural, fearful stillness of my heart, as if the hooded figures that bore me had reached the very lowest point in hell and could go no further. I tasted damp. A cold, musty air drifted between my lips, and a hard stone flatness pressed its slime against my cheek. A rush of mad thoughts, half-formed, invaded my brain, each vying with the other for precedence. I was glad that none of them won an ultimate victory. The small glimpse I had of each was ghastly enough. Then, without warning, a violent sense of movement overcame me as my heart burst into life once more, its wild motion shaking my entire frame, and then its deafening beat battering at the skin of my eardrums. Then nothing. Then a tingling sensation, as touch, taste, sound and smell came back to me, and for a while, without any thought, I was merely conscious of my own existence. When thought came, it punched me in the stomach. The shuddering realization of my true situation and the horrific picture my mind painted of what I supposed to be Catherine's made me yearn to lapse back again into the comfort of insensibility. So far, I hadn't opened my eyes. I could feel I was lying on my front. I could feel I wasn't tied up. I stretched out my hand, and it struck something solid, something damp and immovable. I longed to open my eyes, but I dreaded that first glance at the things around me. It wasn't so much that I feared to find myself looking at something horrible, rather that I grew aghast lest there should be nothing there to see. At length, and with a wild desperation in my heart, I quickly unclosed my eyes. The blackness of an eternal night encompassed me. I struggled for breath. The intensity of the darkness seemed to stifle me, and the atmosphere became intolerably close. I lay still and struggled to make sense of where, maybe even what, I could be. Yet only for one moment did I suppose myself to be actually dead. Human life is too tangible to be mistaken for the life beyond, whatever you might read in the storybooks. No, a new and altogether more dreadful possibility drove the pounding through my heart. Was this that I touched the wall of a tomb? Was a slow, suffocating encasement to be the horrific consequence of my trial?
Trial, sir?
Yes.
What trial?
A hideous perversion of all that's just and true.
I know you weren't at Bodmin Assizes last month. I was there all day, with a farmhand who I charged with smuggling liquor. His was the very last case to be heard. He was an easy catch, sir, having proved a little over-enthusiastic when it came to testing the quality of his haul. What court was it, then, that put you on trial?
Have you ever heard of the Brotherhood of Dionysus?
Yes, sir, I have. It's why I'm here now.
Do you know anything about them?
Well, it was said in the village they were some sort of club, a meeting place for the local gentry.
Don't you believe it? These men may have been born gentlemen, but their behaviour drags them down lower than the very meanest of peasants.
Sir?
They're as decrepit in their morals as their debauchery has reduced them to in physique. They're bad men, sir. They're bad.
And these men held some sort of court?
A hellish court.
And sentenced you to death?
Yes.
But why, sir? Why? Why are you involved with men such as these? Well, I can see. I've only just met you, but I can see that you're a good man, a caring man. What are you doing here, where it seems as if all care has been lost?
I fell in love. 2 years ago, with the most beautiful, the kindest, the most thoughtful girl I've ever set eyes upon.
I need hardly ask her name, sir.
You know it already. At first, her father didn't approve. Why should he? He was a grand man. He owned vast acres of land. His daughter could have married any one of the most eligible young gentlemen in the country. What was she doing, falling in love with me, the son of a local farmer? Oh, we owned our land too. It's all mine now that father's dead. But it's no more than a handful of fields, and I work it myself. I like to read a bit of an evening, and I've even tried my hand at a little poetry, writing it, you know. Oh, nothing much. Just a few short verses about the colour of the wheat when the sun catches it first thing in the morning. Catherine loved these verses. She showed them to her father, but he wasn't interested. To him, I was no more than one of his farmhands. I suppose he was right. That's what I am, a farmhand. And yes, I've even smuggled a little liquor myself. There, I've admitted it.
Oh, then I shall have to arrest you, sir.
Will you?
Oh, yes, I shall have to put you in prison.
Prison?
Yes, sir.
Where is the prison?
Oh, far away from here, sir.
Take me there now. Luckily for me, Catherine knew her own mind. She's like her father in that. And he wasn't a fool. I think he was a kind man at heart. He saw how much Catherine loved me, and so in the end, he gave us his blessing, and we were married. And Catherine came to live with me on the farm. She wasn't afraid to do her fair share of the work either. I think she enjoyed it. Oh, we were so happy. We were so happy. Until the letter came from Martin.
Martin, sir?
Catherine's uncle, her father's brother.
Is the flask empty, sir?
It's all right. I don't need it. Just a little longer here, and then I'll be strong enough to climb those steps.
Oh, will you have something from this tankard, sir? I believe there's a little left in the bottom.
No. I'm fine.
You sure, sir?
I'm fine.
Was it, Martin, you said, sir?
I'd never met him. I still haven't. I don't think. He went away when Catherine was still a small girl. He joined the army to fight the French. But she often used to speak of him, fondly, indulgently. My cheeky uncle, she called him. I think she remembered him as someone exciting, someone slightly mischievous and naughty. A welcome contrast, I expect, to the upright strictness of her father. When the letter came, she was overjoyed. He'd left the army, he said. He'd been out of it for some years and had just returned to Cornwall. He was living some distance away in a little seaside village called St. Carrick.
Why, here, sir. Here, where I'm constable.
Yes.
Martin spoke in his letter of some club he'd joined. A well-respected brotherhood of local gentlemen, or so he said. They meet in a house by the sea just outside the village. If Catherine were to come and visit him, he said, he'd introduce her to his fellow members. He even hinted there might be a future husband for her from among the assembled company. Of course, she wrote back straight away, now that she had an address for him, to tell her uncle all about me. But she was still eager to go and see him. I think she'd like to have set out for St. Carrick there and then, but we were busy. It was harvest time, and any spare moments we had were spent in sleep. I promised her she'd go soon, in a week or so, when the harvest was in, and she seemed happy enough with that. She set to work all the harder that the job might be done more quickly. I was uneasy, though. Who was this uncle? And what was this club that he was so keen for her to visit? I suppose I was just jealous. Jealous she might meet someone smarter, more dashing than me. Well, it wouldn't have been unlikely. The day after the letter arrived was a market day, but instead of going into Trengau, as Catherine thought I'd done, I went up to see her father. I was shown into his library. He practically lived in that room now that he was confined to the house. He was surprised to see me. He didn't come visiting very often. I told him about the letter, and his face darkened when he heard his brother's name. He'd had no letter, he said. And then he told me the truth about Martin.
No, sir, no need to stand yet. Wait a while.
Yes, I must try. Martin Straker joined the army 18 years ago because his brother Richard forced him to. It was probably the most noble use that Martin's particular talents could be put to. He'd caused a bit of trouble in the past, apparently. Got a succession of servant girls into trouble. Even one or two younger daughters of the local gentry. He was a sweet talker, Richard said. But beating a stable boy within sight of death was a step too far, and he had to go. Richard took care of the boy, hushed it all up. He was especially careful that Catherine should hear nothing about it. And in time, the boy recovered. A little. But his hands always shook, and his mouth always dribbled. He never walked again.
My God, sir.
Oh, Martin's capable of far worse than that. In those days he was just practicing. But I think it was a mercy a few years later, when the boy died. When Richard heard about the club in St. Carrick, he became strangely agitated. He said that Catherine mustn't go there, that it was an evil place. I asked him why, but he hesitated, seemed reluctant to tell me, but I insisted. What do you know about the Hellfire Club?
The Hellfire Club, sir?
Richard told me all about it, in front of the fire in his library. It was founded, apparently, sometime in the last century. Its members allowed themselves free rein, he said, to indulge the most animal of their instincts. No limit to the number of women they seduced. No limit to the ways in which these poor creatures were ravished, and not a thought of what would happen to them once they'd been used. The club's motto was, "Do what you like." And they did. And these were wealthy men, some of the most important in the country, peers of the realm even, the very men you'd think who'd wish to set those below them a good example, not abandon everything that decent, honest people hold dear. The club was disbanded, thank God, but it spawned a handful of bastard children, some of them worse, far worse than their uncivilized forebear. The Brotherhood of Dionysus is one of them, the deformed progeny of a grotesque parent. They meet here, in this house, and they're hungry for new flesh, for fresh young women to touch and taste and turn inside out. And the pain they inflict, the fear they engender, well, they're not among the least of the pleasures they savour. And not only women, all humanity is food for their lust, so long as it's young and innocent and can be discarded after use with the minimum of fuss.
None of this was known, sir, in the village. I promise you that. Oh, there were rumours, to be sure, but they added up to little more than boisterous high spirits. If we'd have found out, of course, we'd have done something sooner.
Well, how did Richard Straker know all this? Because he used to be a member when he was a young man, until his innate decency and the sight of the depths to which his fellow members were prepared to sink made him cut all ties with the Brotherhood, and thank God he had no more to do with them. He told me all this with shame in his eye, and a hand that trembled like that of the poor dead stable lad, and he made me promise that I'd not tell one word of this to his daughter. But he knew well how these men's minds worked, and he knew his own brother. He was convinced that Martin wanted Catherine as a kind of present, a kind of token of his loyalty to the Brotherhood.
A man could do that? To his own niece?
I went home without delay, determined to invent some story, anything that would deter Catherine from going to St. Carrick. If all else failed, I'd tell her the truth. I'd take her up to her father. Damn his shame before her. Damn the sickness in his stomach that he'd done to other young women what these men could do to Catherine. Her safety was all that mattered. The house was empty when I got home, but there was a letter for me on the table. From Catherine. She knew I wouldn't mind, and it's only a few miles, and she'd be back again tomorrow. She just couldn't wait to see dear Uncle Martin again. I saddled up the mare. If I was quick, I could overtake her on the road. Young Nick, who helps on the farm, said she'd left only an hour or two before. But she'd taken our best horse, and the mare was slow. I didn't catch her. When I reached St. Carrick, it was dark. I went straight to Martin's house. I knew the address from his letter, but he wasn't at home. He's gone up to the club, the maid told me. Has a young woman called? I asked. His niece. Oh, yes, sir, she said. She's gone up there with him. She gave me directions, and so I headed out towards the coast and came here, to this house that imagines itself a Gothic castle perched high up on a cliff above a raging sea. You can't hear the sea down here, can you? We must be almost on a level with it. I suppose the rock's too thick. If only I'd been cleverer. But my temper was fired. I rode right up to the front door and banged loudly, demanding to be admitted. The door opened almost at once, and I forced my way inside. The man who'd answered the door asked me my business, and I blurted out about Catherine and Martin and shouted for her to be brought to me. But the man denied all knowledge of her and told me that I should leave. I looked around me wildly. I made a dash for a closed door nearby, but the man caught hold of my coat and pulled me away. I shook him off and ran for the stairs, calling Catherine's name all the while. I reached the landing and pushed open the first door that I came to. There was a woman inside, not Catherine, completely naked, sitting on a chair, with 3 old men standing round her. Her hands were tied. As they all turned to me, I was roughly grabbed from behind and 2 men hauled me back out onto the landing. I shall never forget the look of fear on that woman's face just before the door slammed shut again. The 2 men held me, and the man who'd answered the door came up in front of me. He slapped my face and said that I'd violated the Brotherhood's sacred temple and would have to be punished. I was knocked to the ground and kicked again and again, until, exhausted, barely conscious, I was thrown into an unlit room, stripped of my outer clothes, as you see me now, and informed that my trial would take place in an hour. The door was locked, and there I lay, on the floor, panting.
So this so-called trial was held here, sir?
There's a room, way up above us. A vast room, out of all proportion to the rest of the house. You'll have seen it, I'm sure.
I believe I have, sir.
No doubt in the light of day it looks quite innocent, with its thick, dark curtains drawn aside to entice within the warmth of the sun. Is it day now, or is it night? I've lost all track of time down here, where day is night and nothing can be taken for what it seems.
It's daytime, sir.
Ah.
Mid-morning. It was a good time for our raid. Most of the household were asleep, unconscious even, overcome by the excesses of the night before.
Go back to that room tonight when it's dark. Draw those curtains together against the moon and light just a handful of candles on the table in the centre of it, and you'll find the room takes on an altogether more sinister aspect. My 2 guards were robed in black, such that the shadows of their hoods revealed no more of their faces to me than the curving contempt of their mouths. I stood between them and the birch sticks which they carried, a weakened man, broken by the treatment meted out to me an hour before the trial began. We stood there, 3 in a row, in front of the table on which the candles flickered. It was a long, low table, a kind of altar draped in red. Behind it stood, floated it might have been, my 5 accusers. Their scarlet robes seemed almost to be radiating a ghostly light of their own, although I know now this must surely just have been the reflected glow of the candles, by whose light I could see, as with my guards, only my accusers' mouths. I say my accusers, they were also my judge, my jury, and my defence. The figure to the extreme left pronounced my name. He to the extreme right detailed the so-called charges against me. He to the left centre recited the litany of the apparent proofs of my guilt, and he to the right centre declared in a low, rumbling, grating voice that the accused was unable to offer any worthwhile defence. A sudden burst of outrage welled up within me, and I started to speak, but the guard to my left struck a stinging blow across my shirted back, and all rebellion in me was crushed beneath a searing, overwhelming pain. So far, the figure in the centre, the tallest of the 5, hadn't spoken. Now he raised his right arm in mock benediction and declared, in an incongruous, unsettling high voice, that the court had found me guilty. The 5 joined hands, and in a fearful chant together proceeded to pass sentence. It was now that my senses began to lose their grip. The word death was the last I heard distinctly. Their chant became like a buzz in my ears, as if 1,000 angry wasps were encircling me. I tried to concentrate on their mouths, and I saw their lips writhe as they pronounced the deadly locution, but no sense of it came to me. My eyes drifted away to the candles in front of them and lost their focus. The flames seemed to me to be angels winging their way to my defence. Then, as a wave of sickness engulfed me, I saw them to be no more than what they were, fire to light me to the life hereafter. A last desperate urge surged up within me to break free and escape from that room and search the house to find Catherine, but all reason was lost, and I collapsed.
Please tell me. I'm quite calm now, and a little stronger. Where's Catherine? Where is she? Please tell me she's all right. Please, tell me. Where is my wife?
We found several young people upstairs. Some of them are well in body. Some of them are not. 2 of them, I'm afraid 2 of them are dead.
Catherine?
What, how does she look, sir?
Oh, my God. Fair hair, slim.
There is only one fair-haired woman upstairs, sir. I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry.
No. 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 No.
Sir,
No.
there,
No.
sir, that's it.
No.
Beat me, sir, beat
No.
me. As if I were one of those responsible. It will help. I hope. Please, God, it will help.
No.
Oh. Sir? You believed yourself to be in a tomb, sir?
Yes.
Tell me.
Once the thought had struck me, I jumped straight away to my feet. I stretched out my hand again, and the damp, solid obstruction was still there, a wall. I leaned against it and thrust my arms out wildly, above me and beside me and in front of me. I felt nothing, but I dreaded to take even one small step, lest that one small step would reveal to me the suffocating closeness of the other 3 walls. But the suspense was too much, and in the end I could bear it no longer. I took a cautious step to my left and encountered nothing. I took another, still nothing. I took a step to my right, and another, and still all I encountered was blackness, vacancy. I strained my eyes almost out of their sockets in the hope of catching some faint ray of light, but no, nothing. I took a step away from the wall, in the third, untried direction, and another, but still no tomb wall impeded my progress. It seemed at least that a sealed sarcophagus wasn't to be my gallows. What then? Was I simply to be left to starve in this subterranean world of darkness? I'd no doubt that the death sentence would be carried out, and I knew only too well from what Richard had told me, and from my own experience, that my hangmen would enjoy executing a death of more than customary bitterness. The only question in my mind was when and how. It began to obsess me. I found the wall again, and I began to feel my way along it, hoping to get some idea of the size and extent of my dungeon. The wall seemed to curve round, and there were no corners that I was aware of, but its surface was smooth and slimy like the floor. It felt like stone, but had no chinks or bumps in it that would help me to distinguish any one bit of it from any other. I could make my circuit of the chamber and reach again the point at which I'd started, and at the same time be completely unaware of the fact. If only I could make some sort of mark on the wall that would help me to identify my point of departure. Some instinct made me drive my hand into my pocket, and it was only when I discovered its absence that I realised I was looking for my pocket knife. I kept it with me on the farm, for taking stones out of horses' hooves, or cutting apples to test their ripeness. But the Brotherhood had taken it away from me. My mind was still cloudier. For a moment I stood there, helpless, with my hand in my pocket, as if the problem were insurmountable. The feel of the cloth against my fingers stirred something in me, and my mind cleared. I tore a small strip from the hem of my shirt and lay it on the floor at right angles to the wall. Now, if I set off, counting my paces, but at the same time crouching down to feel the ground, I couldn't fail to come across the fragment of my shirt again, and then I'd know I'd completed my circuit. But it was an uncomfortable angle to walk at, and the floor was uneven and slippery. When I stumbled and fell, my exhaustion and the lightness of my head for a moment made me reluctant to continue, and before I knew it, I'd fallen asleep. When I woke, I stretched out my arm. I found a plate with what felt like bread on it, and a tankard full of I don't know what. They'd been placed on the floor beside me. I didn't stop to think. It was good, strong ale. I tore off a piece of the bread. I felt a sudden rush of enthusiasm to continue my tour of the prison. Now, at the moment when I fell, I'd counted up to 24 paces, so I resumed at that number, and with much effort counted on up to 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, before I finally touched once again the strip of my shirt. 48 paces. Now, if two of my crab-like steps added up to about a yard, then my dungeon must have a perimeter of getting on for nearly 72 feet. A huge expanse of unexplored blackness, compared with the pressing walls of the tomb that at first I'd imagined. I found little comfort in this information, though. I completed my circuit of the chamber without finding anything. No door, no opening, nothing that suggested to me any possibility of escape. I resolved to cross it from one side to the other in as direct a line as I could manage. But when I stood up to set out on this journey into the unknown, I stepped on a particularly treacherous patch of slime. At first,
The shock of the fall was all that occupied me. It was only a few seconds later that the startling nature of my situation actually struck me. Although my body, from my neck downwards, was resting on the slimy floor with which I'd become so familiar, my face was touching nothing. My cheeks and forehead seemed bathed in a clammy vapour, and the peculiar smell of decayed fungus drifted up into my nostrils from somewhere far below. Feeling forward with my hands, I shuddered to find that I'd fallen at the very brink of some sort of circular pit, though I'd no idea yet of its full extent. I groped about in the masonry just below its lip and succeeded in dislodging a tiny fragment of what felt like brick. I let it go. I saw at once the death that was meant for me. A heart kick as the floor suddenly disappeared beneath my feet, and a lifetime of anticipation as my body plunged down, down and down. Into what? Was it water way down there at the bottom of the pit that my brick had dropped into? Or was it something far worse? I knew in that moment that my tormentors had no sudden death planned for me, but something slow, lingering, acute. By a happy accident I'd escaped this first attempt, but all I could do now was to sit and wait for whatever it was it delighted them to do to me next. If I'd been brave enough, I'd have got up there and then and put an end to my misery. I'd have run and thrown myself into any one of the thousands of pits that my imagination now pictured scattered across the floor of this vast chamber. But a horror of what kind of death it was waiting for me at the bottom of these pits, and an unformed hope deep down within me that Catherine's father might miss us and guess where we'd come and send help, kept my body pressed firmly into the safety of the wall. My hand touched the tankard, and I took another grateful sip. An unexpected drowsiness swept over me in waves, as the darkness of my mind came down to shroud the darkness of the dungeon around me.
Was it?
Was it what, sir?
Was it Richard Straker who alerted you to the cruelty that was being practised here?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't Richard Straker.
Who then?
A young woman. A young woman called Rebecca Tidwell. She arrived at the village. Her clothes were torn, what remained of them, and she was covered in mud and blood. Her face was disfigured by a deep gash down her left cheek that somehow seemed to drag the eye above it out of its rightful place. And she told a tale. Oh, my God, sir, she told a tale that chilled the very marrow of my bones, and which I'd have scarcely given credit to if the fierce, desperate earnestness of the woman hadn't bestowed on it an irrefutable authenticity. She'd escaped, she said, in peril of her life. She spoke of rape and murder and mutilation. She described what had happened to several young people up here, sir. She told us what happened to your wife.
Catherine?
Yes, sir.
Tell me.
No, sir.
Tell me.
No, sir, I should never have mentioned
Tell me! Please! I need to know what they did to my wife.
We've since found her ourselves, sir. We've found her body, as I said, in a room at the top of the house. So I know Rebecca Tidwell's story is true. Catherine, your wife, was stripped and held down, and several of the men here took their pleasure from her many times over. And when they were tired of that, they chose those parts of her that had given them the most pleasure, and they cut them from her, as if perhaps to preserve their pleasure beyond the present moment. She was conscious when she was cut, sir, but died from loss of blood in the hours thereafter.
Don't call it pleasure. Never call that pleasure.
I'm sorry, sir. I merely tried to speak as they would.
Never try to be like them. Never lower yourself to that.
The Tidewell woman collapsed when she had said all she had to. We mustered our forces immediately and rode on to the house as soon as we were ready. We're in time to save some of you, sir. I'm only sorry we couldn't have saved everyone. And all those responsible have been arrested, sir. And I've no doubt at all that they will be tried and hanged. I'll give you a little time, sir. And then we must go up. When he was 15 years old, sir, still smooth-faced, my son, Simon we called him, he decided he wanted to be a constable like his father. I don't think this came out of any great respect for me, although he was a good lad, always obedient. No, I just don't think he knew anything else. Well, no more than I did when I was his age. No, and I knew no more neither, not for a good long time after. See, I scarcely left the village until I became constable and started going around the county on official business. I was born in St. Carrick, you see, sir, and I married the blacksmith's daughter, who lived a few short paces down the lane. I worked with her father in the forge, until the village decided they wanted someone to keep a bit of order about the place. Somehow I seemed to be the natural choice. I wasn't much good at Trevelyan, if I'm honest. I think Susan's father only kept me on at it out of consideration for his daughter. But people seemed to like me, and if I asked them to do something for me, they'd generally do it. So constable I became, and Constable Simon wanted to be. I didn't discourage him. It's a good job, sir, a worthwhile job. It was late summer when he made his decision, and a week or so later the whole village was bright and lively. There was a bigger-than-usual harvest to celebrate that year. Well, it happened that a few of the young farm lads were taking their merriment a little too seriously. No harm in it, of course. Just indulging themselves after 3 good weeks of hard physical labour. They started teasing a young girl. She was a milkmaid up at old Jessop's farm, asking if they could steal a kiss and what have you. She was a shy girl, didn't know how to reply, and my Simon took exception to what he saw. I don't know, perhaps he held a torch for this young girl himself. Anyway, he decided to try himself out as a prospective constable, and he told these lads to stop what they were doing. Well, they were far too gone in their liquor to take kindly to this, and they shoved this young whippersnapper, as they saw him, out of their way. Now, when you've been constable as long as I have, sir, you get to learn a few basic rules. Never fight back is one of them, or at least only ever insofar as you have to defend yourself. But Simon was raw and hot-headed. He'd take them all on. So a little brawl broke out, until finally, the drink again, I expect, sir, the lads gave Simon a rougher push than they intended, and he fell back into the lane. And it was just bad luck that a cart was passing at the time. Its back wheel caught his head. Oh, he wasn't killed, sir, but his injuries were frightful. And the lads were frantic. They couldn't really be blamed for it. It was Simon who started the scuffle. One of the lads ran to get me from my cottage. I picked him up and carried him home to his mother. She loosened his shirt, and we sat there all night with him. I held him. I cradled him in my arms, feeling the softness of his chest against mine. But by the time the sun was fully up next day, there was no life left in him. I think I love him even more now than I did when he died. But it's easier, somehow, sir. Yes, it's easier with time. You think this might be drugged, sir?
What?
Of this tankard, I say, you think it might be drugged?
I'm sure of it. Never have I slept so soundly or so suddenly.
Yes, sir.
I had a blinding headache when I came to. But things had changed. I could see. A wild, sulphurous light, I've no idea where it came from, a weird light was illuminating the whole of the chamber. I'd completely mistaken its size. Oh, it was round, as I'd supposed, but it's tiny. Tiny. Half the size I'd calculated in the dark. Its circumference must be no more than about 12 yards. I was hugely annoyed by this mistake, out of all proportion to its significance, given the seriousness of the other considerations that were pressing down upon me. But my mind was like that then. I fastened on a trifle and worried at it, magnified it, until that trifle became the most important thing in my life. I spent many minutes chipping away at this puzzle, and then the truth of it suddenly struck me. When I stumbled and fell in my circuit of the chamber, I must have all but reached again the torn-off strip of my shirt, and in putting out my hand to save myself, I fell over it and slept. And when I picked myself up again to continue my circuit of the chamber, I was beyond it. So, in fact, I made 2 circuits of the chamber before I came across the strip of shirt, having imagined myself to have only made 1. And the walls, I was wrong about them as well. Well, you can see, look. They're not masonry at all. They're metal, iron or some such. They seem solid enough, but... And these pictures painted on them, these gargantuan, ugly pictures of men and women doing... You can't have missed them.
I've seen them, sir.
The painting's blurred slightly. Probably the effect of the vapour that's coming up from the pit. Oh, yes. There's only one of them. But, dear God, how did they do it? How did they manage such a feat of construction? It must have taken years.
I think several centuries of contraband did much of the work for them, sir. They wouldn't have needed to have done much more themselves. It's always been a criminal house, this, sir. So local legend has it. It's its position, you see, sir. Isolated, unassailable on its seaward side, and only a little village nearby, no major town for miles.
The floors as I'd pictured it. Cold, slimy stone. But it was a struggle to see it.
Struggle, sir?
Yes.
I said things had changed when I came round that last time, and the weird sulphurous light burned. You see these iron rings? There's 4 of them. They're set into the stone in such a pattern that there's 2 of them for my thighs, and 2 of them for my shoulders. What had changed was not only that I could see, but I was lying on my back on the floor, bound firmly to these rings by 4 straps. I couldn't move my legs. I could raise my head with an effort, and I could move my arms, but only really up to the elbow. And apart from that, I was tied down so tightly by these straps, or thick strips of bandage as I now saw they were, that the only movement I was capable of was the beating of my heart and the rumbling of my stomach. I saw the plate had been moved to just within reach of my right hand, and it had something on it, meat. Greasy meat, lamb it looked like. Oh, I was shocked to find how sharply salted it was. I craned round to find the tankard. I didn't care if it was drugged or not. I needed something to quench the sting of the salt, but it was over on the other side of the pit. A small, insignificant torture, this, but for a few moments it was all I could think about. I couldn't fail to notice the ceiling of my prison. It was some 30 or 40 feet above me and seemed to be made of the same material as the walls. It, too, had pictures painted on it, and the one directly above me was of a devil, with curving horns and a pointed tail. He was holding something between his clawed fingers. It was yes. It was some sort of a pendulum, some sort of antique scientific instrument, like you'd see in a book about Galileo. But what fascinated me was that this pendulum appeared to be moving. Yes, it was moving. Its sweep was brief and slow, its drop was so short, but yes, it was definitely moving. A huge rat was running across the floor by my head. Another crawled out of the mouth of the pit, and another, until I was surrounded by them, sniffing, nosing their way around me towards the plate of meat. I had to wave my hand over it to keep them off. Their red, ravenous eyes glared at me. I think if I'd ever ceased this movement and allowed them to imagine I was dead, it would have been me they'd have treated as their prey. Dear God, what food must they be used to down there at the bottom of the pit? I lay back again and looked up at the devil, and the sweep of his pendulum seemed as if it had got wider and faster. I soon saw why. It was lower. It was getting lower. And now it was nearer. I could see that the weight at the bottom of it was no scientific instrument. It was a blade. A sharp crescent of glittering steel, its horns turned upward, and its underedge as keen as that of any cutthroat razor. Oh, it was too easy for the Brotherhood to come down here, pick me up and hurl me into the pit. I'm so weak I'd have offered no fight. No, they must amuse themselves with this new, fiendish, tantalizing prelude to my death. I could calculate as I watched the blade swing back and forward, lower and lower. I could predict the order in which my body would be cut. The blade would hover for many moments, just an inch above my chest, not quite touching it. Then, without warning, the uppermost threads of my shirt would be parted, not frayed, but cut cleanly, so sharp and fast was the blade. Then the first scorch of pain, as it scored a thin red line down my chest. I could twist my head out of the way, but the red line would be painted longer and longer, and the pain would dig deeper and deeper. And just before I passed out into death with the sheer, unbearable agony of being hacked down the middle, I'd feel the blade slice into my neck and into the fork at the top of my legs. It seemed inevitable. But still I prayed, "Dear heaven, deliver me from this." I prayed not only because I wanted to escape from this horrible death, but also that I might go above and save Catherine. The sight of that other woman's face, frozen in fear behind a slamming door, flashed into my mind, and I lost my grip on sanity. I thrashed about within my bonds. I prayed, "God, bring the blade down more quickly. Spare me this terrible waiting." I tried to force myself up into the range of its sweep. And then, suddenly, I was calm. And I lay smiling, transfixed by the glittering death, as if I were a child, staring in delight at some rare bauble. A pang of hunger struck me. Yes, even under such unbearable torment, my body still craved food. Nearly all the meat on the plate had been eaten by the rats. There were just a few scraps left. As the salt bit into my mouth, a feeling of hope, yes, of genuine hope swept through me. A half-formed thought. I tried to grasp hold of it, and it died. I struggled to find it again, strained my mind to its limits. It was gone. The pendulum was nearly on top of me now. I could smell the steel of the blade as it fanned the air just above me. I struggled frantically to free my arms that I might seize the pendulum and arrest its movement, but it was hopeless. Down it came. Down and down. I knew I was going to die. I saw that in about 10 or 12 sweeps it would reach my shirt. And the thought suddenly crystallised. The half-formed thought I thought I'd lost. I smeared my hand across the plate and covered it in grease and the small crumbs of meat that were left. I rubbed my hands together and rubbed the grease deeply into the bandages that tied me. I got more and waited. They swarmed all over me. Their lips kissed mine. And they started to gnaw at the bandages. I felt them loosen. When I was finally free, I waved my hand and the rat retreated. I waited until the pendulum was at the top of one of its sweeps and I rolled clear. It's gone back up. They're watching me. All the time, they're watching me. Like someone who comes into your room at night to watch you while you sleep, but you can never quite prove that they're there. The light is coming from under the walls. They're closing in on me, forcing me towards the pit. No! No!
God's sake! I saw what was down there. I saw what was down there. Now Catherine's gone, I'd willingly stay here, shut up in this chamber for the rest of my life, if it wasn't for the horror of that pit.
Yes.
But now I'm free. I can just walk out and go back to the farm and learn to live without her. Learn to live with myself.
Sir?
I've had a lot of time to think, shut up down here. Too much time, perhaps. When I was little, about 9 or 10, I can remember it very clearly, I was kneeling on the floor in the kitchen. I was drawing a picture of a cart horse on some paper. It was very sunny. My mother was through an open door in the dairy. That same dairy where I've since watched Catherine working, just like my mother. I could hear my mother singing. And suddenly, a spider, a large spider, crawled on to the edge of my paper. I watched it for a while, as it made its steady progress across the white expanse. And then, just before it crawled off the other side, I picked it up by one of its legs and held it there, wriggling for a few moments, before, quite deliberately, and with a smile on my face, I tore off one of its other legs. And then another. And then another, until the only leg it had left was the one I was holding it by. It squirmed all the while. Its pain must have been intense. I took its body between the fingers of my other hand, pulled off that last remaining leg, and then I put the body on the paper and stepped on it with my foot, crushing it, turning my foot so as to smudge as much of it over the paper as I could. Now, I didn't do all this because the spider threatened me in any way. I did it simply because I enjoyed doing it.
Oh, I'm sure we've all done things like that, sir.
But don't you see? The impulse to torture that spider was the very same impulse that took such a delight in torturing me. My God, it's the same impulse that tore my Catherine apart.
Oh, come now, sir.
I could have done it to her myself.
No.
So could you.
Me, sir?
It's in all of us, don't you see?
In all of us, sir? Is it?
Come on, be honest with me now. When you told me all that just now about what happened to Catherine, didn't you enjoy what you were saying to me just a little bit?
I don't know. Did I?
Didn't you relish all the stripping and the pleasuring and the cutting, just as if you were inflicting all those things on her yourself?
I don't know, sir. Maybe I did. We heard tell, sir. One of my colleagues heard tell from another man, held here, like yourself. He told us how on one occasion the Brotherhood opened the door for him, allowed him to think he was free, let him feel that blessed sense of release, only that they might look at his face, might enjoy the look on his face when he found himself still there, captive.
Oh, my God.
How'd you do, sir? I don't think we've been properly introduced, although you seem to think you know me very well. I'm Martin. Martin Straker.
No escaped woman, no constables or yeomanry, no son called Simon. It's just you. You and a dead stable boy and the rest of the Brotherhood.
Oh, how are you feeling, sir? Are you strong enough to climb those stairs now?
Catherine?
Oh, a man could do that to his own niece. Come on. We must go. There are so many more surprises still waiting for you.
In The Pit and the Pendulum by John Goodrum, based on the story by Edgar Allan Poe, William Trevelyan was played by David Gilbrook, and Josiah Bellamy by Alan Meadows. The Pit and the Pendulum was produced for Rumpus Radio by David Gilbrook from the original stage production directed by John Goodrum.